Okay, so today we're going to be talking about technology and behavioral addiction and how there's been a blurring of the lines between the two over the past 3-4 years or so. So, technology is everywhere, from police stations to college campuses to army bases, and it's used in everything, from education and public health to the mini computers that we carry in our pockets every single day. But how many times have you been with a friend and you've said something to them or asked them a question, you look over at them and they're giving you what? And you have to give them a look and then repeat your question. It's annoying. Plus, what were they looking at anyway? A GIF? A cat GIF? It's not important, but they continue to look at it. Maybe they're on social media like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, and they just want to keep looking at it and keep looking at it, and that starts to take priority over other social interaction. So what this video will do is educate you on the characteristics of behavioral addiction and addiction in general, as well as characteristics of modern technology, and hopefully make a connection between the two with an emphasis on social media and mobile games. So, how does behavioral addiction work and what does it look like? Well, according to Harvard University's mental health website, addiction is a word that comes from the Latin root meaning enslaved by or bound to. And it affects the brain's pleasure center, otherwise known as the nucleus accumbens, which is in charge of dopamine production. So when that's stimulated, there's an overproduction of dopamine, and thus a good feeling spreads in the brain. Now, the problem with the nucleus accumbens is that it's in charge of rewarding survival traits and characteristics picked up over time. So things like eating food when you're hungry, drinking water when you're thirsty, or finding shelter when it's cold out are rewarded. And what addictive behaviors will tend to do is hijack this part of the brain and use it to continue to do the thing that produces dopamine over and over and over again. And this thing is any repeatable behavior that will give the user a reward of dopamine. So it could be gambling, sex, shopping, anything, as long as it is a behavior that can be repeated. So how do we classify addicts? Well, Harvard University's website says that there are 3 different traits that they need to exhibit: an intense craving for the object, a loss of control over using the object or behavior, and a continuing involvement despite adverse consequences, which could be failing health, failing relationships, family, socially, or anything. And beyond this, it's dangerous because it can alter the levels of neurotransmitters in your brain, so your brain gets used to the influx of dopamine and has to adjust accordingly. So when you take away that source, the behavior, the substance, whatever it is, your brain's chemistry is out of whack and you become dependent on that source just to maintain normal levels of dopamine. So how does technology play into all of this? Well, according to the BBC, when a person looks at a phone screen or at any kind of screen in general, a small amount of dopamine is released in the brain. However, this is not in fact the culprit. Instead, what researchers have found is that people like to receive feedback on whatever they post online. And this is due to an innate human trait that we call goal monitoring, in which we as people like to see progression in ourselves, so we like to set goals and then reach said goals. Adam Adler, in his book Irresistible, talks about how if you want to compel people to act, then you need to set small, concrete goals which they can see themselves accomplish. That way, they're more inspired to continue to act. This is easily done on social media because there are so many people all presenting themselves at once that everyone is automatically comparing themselves to everyone else. And whoever receives the most feedback receives the most dopamine, is therefore flushed with good feelings, so they just want to repeat the same behavior over and over and over again. The feedback received is one of several what are called schedules of reinforcement, in which a reward is given for a behavior after a set number of times. Some of them are random, some of them are planned, some of them are consistent, and often some of them are not. In 1971, psychologist Michael Zeller ran an experiment in which he measured the responsiveness for pigeons, in which they pecked a lever and how often food would come out. What he found was, rather than every peck got a food pellet for every press of the lever, he found that the pigeons were much more responsive if food pellets were only released 50 to 70% of the time, and there was a little bit of a gamble, because when they would receive the food pellet, they would receive a rush of excitement and would then continue to peck. And what Zeller found was that there was a bigger release of dopamine in the pigeons' brains when the reward was unpredictable rather than when it was predicted. This kind of pursuit in unpredictable reward behavior was found to be also present in Facebook users. The stuff that they put out there may or may not receive a lot of overwhelming positive feedback, so it's always a gamble, which means the reward is always unpredictable. Additionally, social media sites and mobile games will use a cliffhanger, or not giving their users closure in order to incentivize them to come back and continue using their applications. In other words, there's no end to the use of their app. There's always another picture to like, always another status to read, always another level to beat. And so they come back time and time again. So is there any hope? Is there anything that people can do to combat these techniques that developers and app creators are using to get people to continue to use their apps? Well, according to an article by author Sarah McKay, the only things that people can really do are the cliche things like put your devices down, spend time away from them, spend time outside, exercising, mountain biking, hiking, just not staring at a screen. Something that Adam Adler says we can all start doing right away is to stop taking our phones into the bathroom with us. We sit and we waste time when we could be doing other more productive things. So in conclusion, aspects of social media websites and mobile games are dangerously similar to characteristics of behavioral addictions such as gambling, shopping, and other behavioral addictions, and when gone unrecognized and unchecked can result in a heavy dependency on technology to the point bordering behavioral addiction. I'll leave you with this note. Steve Jobs and Evan Williams, the founder and CEO of Twitter, both refused to let their children have screens in the bedroom. Steve Jobs even refused to let his kids have an iPad, and when pressed said he knew the dangers of technology and wanted to keep his kids away from it for as long as possible.